Streaming from Oklahoma's own digital studio, this is Stephen Nehrenz with This Week in Weather.
Hey everyone, Meteorologist Stephen Nehrenz here. Welcome again to This Week in Weather on this September 30th. Can't believe we've reached the end of September, which means we've only got a quarter of the year left to go. Again, as always, I appreciate you joining me here for This Week in Weather. You know, as we got these started initially back in the spring, early summer, whatever that was, I've slept since then. But when we got these started initially, I was in the process of doing these mostly on Tuesdays. And as we've gone through the last month or two with a very busy schedule here behind the scenes, getting our new studio ready, which debuted this week, that had kind of thrown off my weekly schedule. So I point that out to say going forward, hoping to get back on my routine of having these every Tuesday for you with maybe some fluctuations here and there. And you'll start kind of cranking up a little more robust content again now that we have gotten into our brand new studio, got a little more free time with that as we head into October and beyond. Of course, as I always start with, you know where to find me. If you've got questions, comments, suggestions for what you'd like to see or hear discussed on This Week in Weather, which I've heard some of those suggestions recently about fall foliage, which, by the way, as we get into October, we're going to be discussing that a lot more because there are some pretty big weather impacts on what kind of foliage we might see. So as we get into the next week or two, I'm going to start having some more discussions about that, some more guests joining me down the line as well. But again, you can find me email and Facebook on the screen. And also, I pointed this out last week, but going forward, these This Week in Weather recordings will be on our weather-specific News on 6 weather YouTube channel, which I've got on the screen there. If you go to youtube.com/@newson6weather, that will get you right to the channel where these will be posted. They had been previously posted on our main News on 6 channel, but going forward, these will be on the News on 6 weather YouTube channel. So as you're looking for them on a week-by-week basis, that's where you should be looking for them going forward. So like I said, here we are at the end of September. We've now settled into a much quieter weather pattern after things got kind of bumpy there for the last several days. Quieter here at home. Now we're going to discuss more about when that might change coming up in a little bit. But while it's quiet here, as you're well aware, it's been a little bit more active in the tropics, right? So, and I showed this graphic before, I believe last week or the week before, about kind of when our, the typical climatology, what it's called, or the typical peak of Atlantic hurricane season. You know, when you kind of the long-term averages on a year-by-year basis, you can see that peak, how, you know, it's kind of a bell curve, right? And I'll take this full screen so you can see those numbers and the graphs a little bit better. We've gotten past what is the typical peak of the season, which is right around the middle of September. Now, as we come up to October 1st, doesn't mean the season's over, right? I mean, you know, I mean, actually many years, we're continuing with quite a few tropical systems, whether it's tropical storms or hurricanes, into October, even November. And, you know, case in point, the last couple weeks here has been much more active in the Atlantic Basin. The Pacific Basin's been very active this year, which has been more and more of a recurring theme. But the Atlantic Basin, the last few weeks, we've had Gabrielle and then Humberto and Imelda, as far as named storms that have all become hurricanes at various points. Those are still, Humberto and Imelda are ones that are still being discussed as of this point in time, as of recording here early in the week. Here's a look at those on satellite. Those are two hurricanes that are pretty close together, by the way, and we're going to discuss kind of the interactions that the two are playing off of one another, how they're impacting one another here in just a second. I just realized I'm covering up the text a little bit, so I'll take it full screen again. Hurricane Humberto, again, as of this recording this here on Tuesday the 30th, Humberto close to, but on kind of the northwestern edges of Bermuda and drifting to the north and the east. It's going to kind of skirt its way around Bermuda. Then Imelda was the one had been the wild card for the last several days as it developed as a disturbance coming out of the Caribbean, east of Florida, and then up into portions of kind of the closing in on, at times, the southeastern coast of the United States. And, you know, last weekend, at the end of last week and last weekend, there were certainly some signs of like, this might be trouble for the southeast United States, the Carolina coastlines, which then eventually did change through the weekend and the beginning of this week, and changed, you know, fairly significantly in a good way as far as where it's going to be tracking. Part of that is due to the interaction between these two systems. So just to give you a general idea of where they're heading over the next couple of days, I put boat tracks on the screen here, so it's going to look a little messy as far as like, well, there's a lot to see here. But it illustrates how where both are headed, and again, I say this a lot, take it full screen so you can read it, but I'm going to say it again, I'll take it full screen so you can read the text and the numbers a little better. Humberto, as it's starting to weaken, Humberto a few days ago, at the end of last weekend, was a powerful Category 5 hurricane that thankfully it hit that peak strength in the middle of the Atlantic where it was well away from land, and now in a weakening trend as it kind of hooks a right turn and curves its way around Bermuda, and then will start to weaken pretty significantly and kind of lose its characteristics by late Wednesday into Thursday. As that happens, Imelda, which had been drifting north, now takes a pretty sharp right turn to the east. Now, the unfortunate thing is for Bermuda, that takes Imelda right over Bermuda as a strengthening hurricane. By late Wednesday into Wednesday night through early Thursday, it could be Category 2 strength. We'll see if it gets slightly stronger than that. So, we've had multiple hurricanes this season that have kind of split the difference between the United States and Bermuda, like Humberto is now doing. But like I said, Imelda is going to, unfortunately, it looks like, track almost right over Bermuda as it hooks that hard right turn and heads east. And then by the end of the week into the weekend, the upper level flow will continue to pull that well up into the northern Atlantic. By that point in time, it kind of loses its tropical characteristics and fades away. So that obviously the good news is that Imelda will not be landfall impact for the southeast United States, and there are still some high tides and some rip current risks and things like that along the southeast United States. But thankfully, that system is going to be, that strengthening hurricane is going to be tracking to the east and away and then out into the Atlantic. But like I said, an impact, unfortunately, for Bermuda in the middle of the week as Humberto moves away and then Imelda comes moving in. You may have heard of this term. You may have heard this thrown around a little bit, something called the Fujiwara effect. And you see the little animation going on the screen here. This has been discussed as, is this happening with Humberto and Imelda, with two hurricanes that are in close proximity of one another? So again, you kind of saw that little animation I ran through a second ago. Obviously, the hurricanes have to be, when this happens, whether it's hurricanes, tropical storms, whatever it may be, tropical systems in general, they need to be fairly close to one another. Let me back up. Let me back up here. I'm getting ahead of myself. The Fujiwara effect, what it is essentially when we have two systems like this that are fairly close enough together, two low pressure systems, but in this instance, two hurricanes. When they are close enough together, they can start to kind of act together to rotate cyclonically, in this case counterclockwise, around one kind of central area. And then there are a few different scenarios. Sometimes they can pinwheel around one another. There are other scenarios where maybe the bigger of the two hurricanes absorbs the smaller hurricane, or the two combine into one larger system. There's a few different scenarios there. In this instance, we would be talking about, Humberto, because it strengthened so quickly over the weekend, became a pretty large storm in the Atlantic. Its influence grew, and so there's a possibility that there was at least partially some of this in play with helping Imelda, instead of Imelda going north towards the South Carolina and the Carolina coastline, getting pulled off to the east, at least partially because of the influence of Humberto, because of how large the storm had become. Is it 100% what's happening here? That might be a little bit up for debate here. It's not kind of what we would call the classic example of a Fujiwara effect, which has happened before. We've had examples of it in the past several years in the Atlantic and the Pacific, where you literally see one of the storms rotate around the other or get absorbed by the other. That's not exactly what's happening here, but you can make a case that that's at least partially an impact here, with Imelda getting pulled off to the east as Humberto goes off to the east, as opposed to coming up into the southeast United States. There's also an upper level trough and portions of North America, kind of the northeast U.S., that also is, that jet stream flow is impacting these systems as well. But again, it's a fascinating weather phenomenon. It goes all the way back to, I want to make sure I get his name right, a Japanese scientist, Dr. Sakuhei, I hope I'm saying his first name right, Fujiwara. He first described this back in like the early 1920s as describing kind of the motion of these systems in water. Like I said, this can happen with other upper level storm systems as well. That's where the Fujiwara effect, that's where it gets the name from that Japanese scientist meteorologist who kind of discovered this phenomenon decades ago. It's a fascinating thing to watch. And like I said, is it a totally classic example of what's happening here? Maybe not, but I think there's at least a partial influence of that. And again, in a good way, as far as pulling Imelda away from the United States coastline. Little nerding out about that. Now let's get back into our local weather here. Of course, we've been drying out over the last several days, which, by the way, has timed out really well for the Tulsa State Fair, which we'll talk about the rest of the State Fair forecast in just a second. But we did pick up some more rain over about a several-day stretch in most parts of green country. We'll discuss, that also in just a second. But that has been enough to push us back, kind of up the list as far as the top 10 wettest years on record, at least through the end of September. So for the first 9 months of the year, the first 3 quarters of the year, you can see where the top 10 list has been. Of course, coming out of spring, early summer, we were basically up at the top with how crazy soggy we were from April, May, and June, even in the first half of July. And then we kind of dried out after that. And we've been kind of up and down the top 10 since then. As of the end of September, through the first 9 months of the year, 2025 is 6th wettest year to date for Tulsa specifically. Of course, the totals vary across the area, but for Tulsa specifically, over 46.5 inches of rain for the entire year. But it has come, it hasn't been evenly spread out throughout the entire year, right? It has been pretty, a lot of it was heavily concentrated in about a 3-month stretch of the year. I point that out because, that's one reason why, even though we have been way, way, way above normal on rainfall for the entire year, there are some areas in green country right now that are actually kind of settling back in to at least some short-term moderate drought. Now look at this on the screen. This is the rainfall we've had each month in Tulsa specifically. Again, just kind of give you a measuring stick here. And like I said, if you can read that number up at the top, that 46.58 inches of rain, that's about 14.5 inches of rain above normal. So that is way above normal. But if you look on the screen here, I've got the monthly totals, and then that yellow line in the middle is what's considered like normal rainfall for each month. And notice how, we came out of the start of the year on a somewhat dry note. Now, again, January, February, we typically don't pick up just a whole lot of measurable rain or measurable moisture. Those are typically dry times of the year outside of us maybe getting a snowstorm here or there. And that's what happened this year as far as overall moisture. And then, of course, we got into April, May, and June, and the rain just got out of control for about that 3-month stretch. And that sent us into those, near record territory. And then notice what's happened here at the tail end of summer, right into the beginning of fall. Rain totals have settled down as you'd expect them to, but we've been back near or even a little bit below normal. I'd say from the second half of July through about the first half of September, it really dried out pretty significantly. So that just goes to show you how we can have some areas that are starting to dry out, have maybe a little bit of crunchy grass developing, even though we've obviously through the year had a ton of rain, and all it would take would be a couple good rain systems to come in soon to kind of settle the dust a little bit to sort that out. But that's how there are some areas, I'd say especially west of Tulsa, that are a little bit drier than everyone else, that have just kind of missed out on the last few rainfall events. So some of those areas have settled into at least short-term moderate drought, even though it's been way above normal rainfall for the year. And having said that, the question now becomes, okay, is that going to change as we start off October? Well, probably not in the short term. I mean, for most of the last couple of weeks, with some exceptions, really going back almost a month now, but obviously there's fluctuations week by week. But I'm rambling. With some exceptions, the last few weeks, that big old H, when I show you the big picture, that upper level ridge that's centered off to our north and east, has been the dominating feature. So we've had smaller systems that have kind of slid in under that ridge at times, but in general, and I've talked about this a lot because I show you the big picture a lot here on This Week in Weather, but like I said, what it does is pushes that jet stream flow well to the north, so that pushes the cold air way away from our area up into Canada. And the jet stream has been trying to dive south and has been across the western United States. So there's been cooler, much wetter weather in Pacific Northwest, which frankly you would expect, right? And then storm systems diving into the Rockies and the southwestern United States as well. But that upper level ridge has been blocking those systems from getting here. By the way, also, well, you can't see it, so I'll have to make it full screen again here. I was going to point out the hurricanes. There we go. Right off on the corner of the screen, you notice how you can see both hurricanes on the map there, Humberto and Imelda. And I mentioned, there may have been at least a partial Fujiwara effect here as far as pulling Imelda to the east, but also just the upper level pattern. I don't have that jet stream flow drawn all the way down to where the hurricanes are, but that jet stream flow, that upper level trough that's been building just to the north of those hurricanes is also, I'd say, a significant influence on helping pull those hurricanes further out into the Atlantic and not help them reach the United States, which again, good thing, right? As we go forward here, like I said, the question is, as we get into October, are we going to see any changes? Well, in the short term, as I let the big picture roll here for the next several days, not a whole lot. I mean, there will be, you notice as I've got this rolling here, you're seeing quite a bit of moisture along the Gulf Coast regions, from say Louisiana to Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, those regions, where there's going to be some leftover moisture. Could be some small disturbances there with some tropical moisture as we head from the end of the week into the weekend. Not necessarily expecting those to become like actual developed tropical systems, but some tropical moisture down there that tries to slide in underneath that upper level ridge. Probably won't get here though. So that stays to our south. The upper level ridge continues. Notice this I've jumped ahead here a few days to the weekend. That upper level pattern, not a whole lot different than what we have right now. The ridge is still centered near us. It's pushing the cool air well to the north, keeping those storm systems, kind of that main storm track across the western United States, the Rockies, into the central and northern plains. I'll let this roll into next week, and notice, I mean, the jet stream is ebbing and flowing. This happens this time of year. The jet stream starts to get more active with stronger storm systems developing, trying to drop south, but even into next week, that upper level ridge is really stubborn. We kind of went through this last year as well. We got to the end of September and the beginning of October, and when we're all starting to think, okay, let's get some fall weather back in here, and we had to wait and wait and wait for a while into October because we had a very stubborn upper level ridge keeping the cold air at bay, cooler air, I should say, at bay, keeping storm systems away from us. That's kind of the setup where we're in, at least for the first week of October. There have been at times, if you're someone that looks at the forecast models on a daily basis, has been looking further down the line, 7, 10, 12, 14 days in the future, which, my caveat I will always say, if you're someone that does watch forecast models, hopefully you know that when you're looking that far in the future, the accuracy range decreases. You're going to see big fluctuations. So there may be a day or two where you look down the line and see like, oh man, that's the weather pattern I want. And then it goes away in the models because that's just what happens when you're looking at forecast data that far out. I also point that out because there have been some signals at times into the first part of October of some fall cold fronts trying to make it our way. You've probably seen some of that from some other sources on social media saying, hey, that fall cold front's coming, once we get past the first several days of October, and we're sitting here going, well, I don't know about that. Now, I mean, again, there will be fluctuations, there will be changes with this, and for us fall weather fans, hopefully we will start to see, as we head down the line the next few days, at least signs that the stronger jet stream starts to really exert its influence, starts to weaken the upper level ridge, and allows us to get some fall cold fronts in here, at least for a few days, to kind of, bring down the warm temperatures that we've been on. It's just not quite happening yet. I just hadn't been sold on a big enough jet stream dip south to bring us one of those fall cold fronts like had been previously teased from some other folks. And again, we're just not quite there yet. This where I've got the clock stopped here on the future view. This will be about the middle of next week. Again, there could possibly, once we get beyond this, will hopefully be some changes in the trends of the ridge weakening, the jet stream dipping further south, bringing us some cool air and some wetter conditions. Like I said, by the way, as I was talking about the rainfall a minute ago, even though I know we're way, way above normal on rainfall for the year, some of us are drying out. We're going to need some more rain pretty soon. If we go through 2 or 3 weeks of solid, very warm and dry conditions, we'll dry out in a hurry. So we're going to need some rain as we head further down the line into October. So we're going to hope for that, purely from a rainfall standpoint. But again, over the next several days, I'm taking you into, I just kind of showed you this on the jet stream pattern, the big picture, but just kind of quantifying it a little bit. High temperatures for the first week of October. Well, guess what? Still well above normal. Normal highs for the first week of October, generally upper 70s. I think upper 80s, mid to upper 80s will be the general rule. There could be a day or two in there at the end of the week, the beginning of the weekend, where we're back close to 90 again, especially west of Tulsa. And then the first half of next week, probably not changing much. Again, I put possible front question mark. That had been the time range that some of the forecast models have been saying, yeah, here we go, here's a bigger front. And most of that guidance has significantly backed off from that. But that's still a time range around the middle of next week and beyond that we're just going to be watching, because again, that's far enough out that there's still a lot of time for some of that data to potentially change. So we're going to be watching down the line here. Having said that, still the signals, this is the longer range temperature outlook that comes from the folks at the CPC, the Climate Prediction Center, getting into the middle of next week and beyond. still suggesting a warmer than normal pattern, not only for us, but for most of the country. More or less kind of the pattern that we're already in right now, where the Pacific Northwest is cooler and wetter, but basically east of the Rockies, it's much warmer, and many spots are relatively dry. Like I said, we're going to need some rain here soon, and this would be the precipitation outlook for that time as we get further down the line into like the second week of October, is that those rainfall signals at least pick up kind of across the middle of the country. We are going to need that to happen, like I said, before too much longer, before we dry out too much. I say all this to say, I've said this before, I'm a big fall weather fan, so yes, I'm also, raise my hand, I'm one of those folks that about this time of year, when it's not cooling down yet, at least in the afternoons, I start to get a little grumpy about it too. It's like, come on, where are those fall cold fronts? But this has happened. I mean, this can happen this time of year, and this has happened more than once over the last few years, going into early fall, where it's been kind of a waiting game well into October before we start to get some of those bigger fall fronts in here. And I think also amplified by the fact this year that, back at the end of August, the beginning of September, we had that, that very, very, very early fall tease that I think a lot of us enjoyed. And I think that made this wait for fall even more difficult. It'll be here eventually, right? I mean, we can't, the weather pattern can't hold fall off forever, but it's going to take its time. Now, like I said, back to kind of wrapping things up with how things are locally the next few days. The Tulsa State Fair. Through the end of the week, it ends this upcoming Sunday. It looks like we're going to get through the Tulsa State Fair the entire 11 days without any rain or storms to worry about. Which doesn't happen that often. Now this, I believe, will be the second year in a row that we've pulled this off, because I think we pulled this off last year as well with 11 essentially straight dry days and well outside of a sprinkle or two. Looks like we're going to pull that off again this year. From Wednesday, Thursday, Friday into the weekend, highs upper 80s. I think Thursday and Friday in particular could be the warmest. We've had a lot of light wind days recently. I think over the weekend, the last couple of days of the fair, Saturday and Sunday, are going to be breezier than we've been here recently. But generally, it's going to be sunshine and warmth. Also looking ahead for football as we head towards the end of the week. OSU and TU are away. I'll talk about those forecasts in a second. But if you're going to be in Norman on Saturday for OU's game against Kent State, that's a 3 p.m. kickoff on Saturday. It'll be a pretty warm day. Again, no surprise given the outlook and the forecast I just gave you. And as I always say, since we record this earlier in the week, I always want you to check back in with our weather team through the week for updates on this forecast before we get to Saturday, because there could still be some changes here. But this looks like, again, a pattern that's going to hold relatively steady. I wouldn't anticipate huge fluctuations on this between now and then. You can see warm weather. So I've got tailgating temperatures. I'm calling that noon, about 3 hours before the game at 80 degrees. And then kick off through the game in the upper 80s, kind of breezy. So there'll be a good breeze to work with, but upper 80s, sunshine, sitting in those bleachers in Norman Saturday afternoon. We'll be a little on the warm side of things, and then still generally in the upper 80s as the tail end of that game is going for OU against Kent State. And as I mentioned, I've got kind of all three forecasts on the map here. These are the kickoff temperatures. I just mentioned OU, but then OSU and TU. Of course, OSU is going to be in Tucson on Saturday, taking on Arizona. No surprise, in the desert of Arizona, it's going to be pretty toasty out there. It'll be very dry. Don't have to worry about it being muggy, but it'll be about 90 at kickoff for OSU's game in Tucson, breezy, probably low 90s, low to mid 90s during the game. And then Tulsa will be in Stillwater. My goodness, they were in Stillwater a couple weeks ago. They will be in Memphis Saturday evening, taking on Memphis. And it looks like warm weather there as well. That's a 7 p.m. kickoff in Memphis Saturday evening. Low 80s a kickoff, and then 70s during that game. So it looks like pretty good weather for TU's game on Saturday evening. Like I said, a little toasty for OSU's game in Arizona, and pretty warm and breezy weather for OU's game on Saturday in Norman. That's an update on where we are right now. And kind of, like I said, I'll look ahead here as we start off October. Again, we're searching for fall weather, fall morning or afternoon temperatures. Just not quite there yet. It'll be here before we know it. Knock on wood for us fall weather fans. Again, that's what we've got for this week in weather. Like we say, streaming on YouTube. And as I emphasized at the beginning, again, going forward, these will be posted, this week in weather specifically, will be posted on our News on 6 weather YouTube channel. So that's youtube.com/@newson6weather is where you can find these. That's where the one last week's episode was posted. This week's and going forward will be posted there as well. Again, as I always say, I really appreciate you joining me for this week in weather. I hope you have a great week. Take care of each other, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for watching this Oklahoma's own digital studio live stream from the Bob Mills Weather Center. Stay with News on 6 online and on television anytime for the latest weather updates to keep you safe and informed.